And yet when we start discussing fears and really, and when we do it in a workshop, when Mary's done it in a workshop, they find they can list hundreds of fears. Sometimes half a book of fears is what most people can list. Understand that every fear you have prevents you from discovering desires. So unless you're prepared to feel your fears in some way, you will not be able to truly discover your desires. Does that make sense? Yeah?
So, I have a question. Okay, say I'm living this very fear-based, controlled life. Like every variable is controlled in my life. I know I have a routine. I only associate with people that I feel comfortable with. I am in a job I feel comfortable with, and I know where I'm going with that. My home environment is very well controlled, and I'm in a relationship where there's a lot of, I can be in control all the time.
Yeah.
But I feel really dissatisfied. I don't really know what my passion is in life, and I just feel blah.
Yeah.
How do I move from there to a place where I'm totally living in harmony with my passions and I feel really alive again?
Mm-hmm.
Is it simply a matter of just challenging, seeking out fear and challenging whatever it is? Or do I need to do something relating to my passion and desire?
Well, what you described, though, normally a person living like that doesn't know what they desire.
That's what yeah.
So that they need to do two things. The first thing they need to do is they need to start challenging all of their controls. Mm-hmm. So whatever your controls are, you need to challenge them. So let's say you find yourself controlling, like, for example, every single day you have to clean the house so the house is nice and tidy. You like coming in and you like seeing it clean. Then what I would do is have one day a week where it's allowed to be a total mess and see how you feel about that. Does that make sense? And that would challenge some of those fears. Now, sometimes we have a lot of fears associated with that. For example, if on the day that it's a mess, your mother comes to visit, many people then have a higher level of fear. They run around, they hear their mother come and visit, and they run around cleaning everything up. And that indicates that there is an addiction in play. That indicates that the cleaning up is not a desire, but rather based on a fear. And so then I would challenge that fear. So I would leave it untidy, and when Mum walks in the door and starts nagging me for the place being untidy, I would address the issue with her emotionally. I'll say, why is it that any time my house is untidy, you come in and nag me about it? It's none of your business. Go and come back when you can walk in the door without nagging me about anything. Right? And that would address the... You never see her again? And that's fine if you never see her again. And my feelings are, if you never see her again, that indicates that all of your life, all she's ever done is nagged you, and she doesn't have enough love for you to visit you without attacking you in some way. So to me, then I would have to accept that my mother doesn't love me very much if that's what she wants to do. You see, every single time we address a fear, we automatically also find out truth about relationships and all sorts of things, including our desires. We find out truths about our desires every time we confront a fear. Now, that's the first thing we need to do. So if we're in a state where we've got everything under control, everything's fine, we're really happy with our life, then except we feel quite unfulfilled, then what we need to do is we need to start challenging our fears. And the way we challenge our fears is by challenging your controls. You see, a lot of people don't see their controls at all until they start to get challenged by them. Right? And many people in the Western world have a huge number of controls. We have a control of our physical environment. We don't like to be cold. We don't like to be hot. We don't like to be wet. We don't like to be too dry. We don't like to be... And the list goes on, right? And so what we finish up doing is having a very narrow range of our life as to what we are happy with. And We are very happy when everything in our life suits that narrow range. But as soon as one parameter goes outside the narrow range, we are instantly upset. We are instantly angry or sad or feeling hurt or afraid. And that is an indication of how controlled our life is. Does that make sense to everyone? And what we need to do is challenge these controls, and then we'll expose our fears. And if we expose our fears and release them, then we'll have more desire in our life. We'll have a way of discovering more of our passions and desires. When we don't challenge our fears at all, and we're just living in our addictions, you'll find that you are not actually finding many of your desires at the same point. So that's the first thing that's important.
So it's literally that addictions sit on top of fears, and the minute we start clearing away fears, our true nature and our true passions start to surface.
Yeah, and some of our true nature and passion may firstly be a bit of grief under the fear, and that we need to experience. And then once we experience that, we'll start to have some joy, and we won't be constrained by the same fear anymore. So we won't be controlled by the fear. Unfortunately, what most of us do is that we control the fear using methods. I knew a man when I was younger who was very afraid of flying in a plane. And he knew he was afraid, he would get very afraid. So what he would do is he would have 5 double scotches before he got on the plane. 5 drinks. Sorry?
And he was the pilot.
No, he wasn't the pilot. Sorry. Fortunately. And then he could fly from one location to the other. And where we lived, there was sea between us and almost any location you could go to, so he had to fly. And so every single time, instead of enjoying the flight, and if you fly with him, you say, look at that out there. I don't want to look at anything. He's not looking at anything. He's half drunk, not wanting to look at anything, and still in a place of terror with his fear. So if he addressed that particular fear, he would actually enjoy flying, enjoy the sensation of going up, coming down, enjoying what he could see. Everything would change for him. He wouldn't be afraid to go places either. He would only go places if he really had to for business. Aside from that, he would stay home, and he would try to organise his life in any way to avoid the plane trip, any way he could. If you're organising your life to avoid something, then it's an indication that we're in fear. Right? While you're in fear, you cannot discover your desires. So it's very important to understand that. The second thing that we would do, if we do not know much about our desires, is we would start a process of experimenting. In other words, we would make a list of a heap of things that we've never done before, or only did when we were a child. Right? And we would list all of those things, and then we would go to do them and then feel what we feel when we're doing them. Now, most of the time, we have avoided these things. So that tells us generally that if we have avoided these things, there must be fear associated with doing these things. So, for example, how many of you love music? How many of you all love music? Most of you love music, yeah? How many of you play a musical instrument? You notice there's much less people who who play a musical instrument than who love music. Now, why is that? You know why I feel that is? Because the rest of us are in fear about having to actually produce music. We are in fear about an instrument. If we love music and we don't play any, then there's a high likelihood when we're a child something happened that caused us to avoid anything that may cause us embarrassment. And picking up a musical instrument at the beginning and you start playing it, often you can't play it, of course, and you have to learn, and time has to go past, and during that time everyone around you criticises you generally, right? And everyone around you feels very uncomfortable because they hear the mess of our music. It's because it's not music yet, it's just noise. And they hear the mess of that. And often we cannot cope emotionally with the projection that comes from them to us about the engagement of the music. And so we stop. If we really had a desire, we would keep going. So I suggest that every one of you who have a desire for music and yet who are not playing an instrument need to go out and choose an instrument and start learning. Does that make sense? And see what fears come up. Because initially what are going to come up are all of your fears associated with the process. That's what's going to come up first. That's the reason why you haven't done this and you've been relying on other people to provide the music for you. Once you get through your fears, you will begin to feel very positive about picking up the instrument yourself and learning. You'll come to love the learning process, and you'll also enjoy, eventually everything will click together, and all of a sudden it'll all sort of come together and gel. And from then on, you're starting to actually play songs. And from that moment on, you will actually enjoy the process. And then you'll know whether it's a desire or not. Only then will you know whether it's a passion or desire for music or not. You see, most of us have fears associated with every one of our desires, and that's what we need to address.
It sort of makes it seem arduous sometimes, doesn't it, to actually follow our passions, because in front of every one of them is a whole lump of fears. Like I'm thinking about picking up the instrument and knowing how I've tried, how arduous it feels, because there's so much emotion in me about I'm terrible at this, I'm not as good as other people, why am I so stupid? All this sort of stuff comes up.
And in particular, most of our emotions are associated with our family. So in your case,
my mum, you know, the musical family, and the gene missed me, and that's, everyone's always said that, you know. So lots of stuff about approval, disapproval, jealousy, fitting in, all that stuff.
All those things, yeah.
Yeah, and then at the end of it, maybe I'll realise it's not even a desire.
It's highly unlikely that when we engage that process, that we see. God created us to have many desires and passions. Now, some of those desires and passions are greater than other ones. Does that make sense? Some are higher value inside of ourselves because of our personality and nature than others. But you will get to a stage in your future, once you release many of your fears, that you're almost passionate about everything. You're sort of passionate about everything that you can do, and you embrace almost everything rather than being controlled in your environment. And so, you know, if somebody said to you, you need to get up tomorrow and talk to 100 people about your passion, that's a very good sign as to whether you're really passionate or not, that you really have a desire or not. If you can't talk in front of 100 people about your passion, then it's highly likely there are some addictions involved still in your passion. And you can release them if you wish. But the reality is, when we're truly passionate, we will be able to get in front of 1,000 people and talk about our passion. Right? When we're truly passionate about what we do. We'll be able to do that because we will not be focused. Remember, the first point of this discussion was we will not be focused on other people's opinions of our passions.